2020's latest present is no Ohio State-Michigan game. Sorry, Wolverine fans, Michigan-Ohio State game this season, as is, of course, rivalry and tradition. We got Clayton Safey on the line from the Wolverine Mag on Rivals. We've had Clayton on a number of times. His information, his knowledge, insight is obvious, so check him out there on Rivals at the Wolverine Mag. Clayton, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Other than the fact that, every year you kind of look forward to the Michigan-Ohio State game, no matter, what kind of year it is, I guess for either team, it's kind of always looked at and for college football fans around the country. So it's kind of sad, a little bit depressing. And Mark, we'll never know what would have happened on Saturday. We have no idea what the outcome would have been.
So by gauging fan interest, fan response from the Michigan side, do you sense that some people are relieved? Other ones are like, well, I don't care. We would have gotten killed anyway. But others are, hey, it's a rivalry. We wanted to compete. We wanted to be there.
I'd say the most I've seen is relief. But at the same time, those would be the people saying things, I guess, on Twitter and message boards and things like that. There's certainly a faction that, still looks forward to that game. I think it's just such a weird year that things get canceled left and right and things get rescheduled and shifted around, where it's kind of changed the mindset for everybody. Until we go completely back to normal, people are going to have different opinions on things. I mean, I'd say the majority of the people that I've seen actually speak out on it, and these could be anonymous people, like I mentioned, on a message board or Twitter, are saying, like, thank God. At the same time, and I've seen also, credible people say that, like, it would have been a bloodbath and whatever. And even if you think that, which, I happen to believe Ohio State would have blown Michigan out, I still look forward to that game. I still, just love the rivalry, and it certainly had its swings. Ohio State right now has won 14 out of 15, and, Michigan back in the 90s had won, 9 out of 10, 9 out of 11. So it has its swings back and forth. It's not on Michigan's side right now, but either team likes to play that game. And I can tell you this, too. Inside that building, they wanted to play. They were super shorthanded. They were going to have probably less than 40 scholarship players available due to positive tests and contact tracing. So they wanted to play, and, the team was not cleared to practice fully in pads. They were able to work out in helmets a little bit Monday and Tuesday, but I can tell you that Jim Harbaugh was pushing to get these guys to play. The players wanted to play, and he said yesterday in his press conference, to a man, everybody wanted to go out there, and you saw some of that talk on Twitter as well. They wanted that opportunity, so there, make no mistake about that. They just couldn't do it, and the doctors that we had on a press conference yesterday said that they weren't going to be able to clear it in time, and that the positive cases kept rising. And I guess that's 2020. It's disappointing, but it is what it is, and it's surreal that we're at this point. I guess that there's going to be no Michigan, Ohio State for the first time since 1917.
And for those people out there that love college football but aren't necessarily entrenched in this rivalry, you would have to be completely under a rock, obviously, not to understand it, know it, acknowledge it. But at the same time, there's just a narrative, a thought process out there by college football fans that are outside the rivalry that Ohio State kills Michigan every year. That's not the case. So if we were sitting here 2 years ago, we would be going into the 2018 game in which Michigan was a 4-point favorite, expected to win the game. It wasn't a surprise that Ohio State won the game, but in the manner that they did. But all the games, except for Rich Rod getting blown out a few times, have been competitive for the 15-year run that Ohio State's on up until the last two. So just to set that straight, I see all sorts of things on social media. Well, Ohio State's blown them out for 15 straight years. So, what's the big deal? All right. Clayton Safey's on the line from the Wolverine Mag on Rivals. So we've got Big Ten championship game weekend in which Michigan and everyone else in the Big Ten would be paired up against an opponent from the Western Division. Mm-hmm. A possible bowl game, because despite the record, it's been stated by the NCAA, bowl bids are open to everyone or anyone, but there are a limited number. But of course, with Michigan's name brand, I would think that they could push themselves into a bowl game if they so chose. How important is it for the brand, the program, and the 2021 team to play any more football this year? Or is it more beneficial just to shut things down and go to spring practice?
Yeah, I think That's interesting. And usually the case is always, well, even if you win 5 games, you know how some teams get into a bowl with just 5 wins if there's, you know, extra spots, or you win 6 and you're a big program like Florida State a couple of years ago, you know, playing 6-6 and like I think the Birmingham Bowl or whatever is down there. You say it's worth it. You get the 15 extra practices. You can get your team going for the next year and hopefully gain some momentum. You play a Tulsa type and, you know, whatever. I'm thinking specifically, I think of Florida State a couple of years ago. Okay. That's not the case this year because, you know, with the schedule pushed back, especially in the Big Ten, you don't get those extra practices before the bowls. If you look at the bowl schedule, most of the ones that any non-playoff team is going to be in is from just before Christmas until about December 29th. So you're looking at just like a week of practice and really probably just 4 or 5 days until they'd fly down to wherever they'd play. That's one thing. And then another thing is, you know, I mentioned they have about 45 scholarship players reportedly that are out right now with either contract tracing or a positive test. So undetermined when they'd be able to return, I guess, with the contact tracing, but it's not like you'd have your full team back, even if, you know, you do have these games. So I don't think it's super important, honestly, for 2021 that they play. I think you know, at the same time, they're going to do everything they can to play next week against, it looks like it would be Purdue or possibly Nebraska from the Big Ten West. They're going to do what they can, but just from a you know, somebody who covers the team and just looks at college football in general, I don't think it's necessarily the most important thing for next year. At the same time, they are going through some voluntary workouts and they're staying in shape and condition and things like that, at least the guys that can be in the building right now. But that's kind of where it's at.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down what we expected to be the game this week on Saturday, but it's a cancellation. And as Clayton had informed us a few minutes ago, the first time since 1917, no Michigan-Ohio State game. And we'll see if it's the end of the Wolverines season. We'll see if it's the end of Jim Harbaugh as a Michigan head coach. We've heard the reports. They've been widespread. John Bacon was the first one, I believe, to lay it all out there in regards to the options that Jim Harbaugh has on the table from the administration regarding contract extension, incentive-laden, lower base salary versus some NFL teams that are interested. Do you think it would be better for the football program to be done with Jim Harbaugh, start fresh, start anew, or bring him back and continue what he's built? And for those people that might chuckle, it is something that he's built in regards to a roster, a top 10 to 15 roster in the country.
Yeah, I think, well, the best thing they could do right now is do something before signing day, which is a week away from when we're talking right now. So basically, you know, you have some kids that are in limbo, and we know for a fact that Jim Harbaugh is telling recruits that he's, quote, 100% committed to being Michigan's coach and that he's going to sign a 3-year extension. At the same time, it makes you wonder why that hasn't been done yet. We had Ward Manuel, Michigan's athletic director, and Jim Harbaugh, along with some of the doctors, on that press conference I mentioned earlier. This was yesterday. And, you know, inevitably, some of the questions turn to the future. You know, what are they going to do? Basically, why hasn't something been announced? They said they're going to talk after the season and that, you know, they're counting the last game. They're hoping that they can play, even though it looks unlikely at this point, as the end of the season, which would be December 19th. And then they'll talk. Well, that's, you know, with the pushback schedule, that's 3-4 days after signing day that they would sit down and have that conversation. At the same time, it is reported, and you mentioned John U. Bacon, Chris Ballas with us over at thewolverine.com, our senior editor, who was all over the story the first time that Jim Harbaugh chose Michigan and was the guy who was basically leading the charge with all the sources and the reports. He's doing the same thing this time around, and they've basically been hearing the same thing, that Jim Harbaugh's been operating the entire season as if the deal that they talked about before COVID hit, 3-year extension, was done. And that possibly now that they have had conversations, despite what Ward Manuel said, and that the deal isn't necessarily what it was, that it's more incentive laden, and that, you know, the base salary would be a little bit lower. But he's, you know, continued to tell recruits and people around him that he's going to be here. So that's kind of the reality of the situation right now. What I think, like I said, do something right away before signing day. it seems like the majority of their class is going to stay intact. And even if he left and a kid signed, they'd let him out of the letter of intent the way, that things are going at this point. But what I think personally is, I've told you this a number of times, and I know we don't have the same viewers each and every time. So basically, I think that they, should make some assistant coach moves and, try to keep Jim Harbaugh. I'm somebody I'm 23 years old, and I've lived through a few coaching searches here at Michigan. Michigan's only had 20 head coaches, but they've had 4 here basically in my lifetime. And they haven't always gone so well, even when a guy looks like a sure thing or a guy looks like a Michigan man coming back. And, Rich Rod was the hot name on the street, and he could have gone to Alabama possibly. That was kind of the thing. And look where they would have been, I guess. But I've seen it go the wrong way. I've seen coaching searches, and so has Nebraska, so has, Texas, where they wish they could have their old coaches back. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to play out where Jim Harbaugh turns this around after a bad season, but I'd be willing to bet on him, I guess, over, some of the other names out there, and we can talk about some of those, but that's just my personal feeling on it. And, he's won 70% of his games. How attractive would this job be to a guy that is looking at it from the outside in, saying, well, this was a Michigan football legend, which Jim Harbaugh is. He was a Heisman Trophy finalist here, beat Ohio State every time, won Big Ten championships, and then has done really well as the coach here, despite the lack of championships. They let him go. They let him walk, or he chose to leave, or they fired him. Man, what do I have to do? Obviously, they want to beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten, but Ohio State's at a tough level right now where it doesn't look like they're going to slow down anytime soon. So doesn't excuse the lack of championships, but you look at what's best going forward. I would stick with Jim Harbaugh. I know a lot of people have that opinion. I know a lot of people have the opposite opinion. I respect all of it. And, I would think that, they all just want what's in the best interest of the program going forward. It's really up to opinion.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking Michigan, and so many different storylines to talk about despite no game on the field. Jim Harbaugh's status at Michigan being paramount. We got Clayton Safey on the line from the Wolverine Mag on Rivals. And, of course, talking Michigan football, we ask that you subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. This football team should be winning based on the production on the field in previous years. There not being a drop-off in recruiting. And I know it's a strange season, a shortened season. It's only been 6 games played, but still a program that has churned out 8-4, 9-3, 10-2. Those have basically been the 3 records that Jim Harbaugh has produced. Has now just completely fallen off the rails on the field in 6 games. It's not a measured talent drop off decrease. Can you really put your finger on what's gone wrong in 2020?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things, and the recruiting classes have been good and they've been highly ranked, but they have had some misses, and a lot of people think that they're recruiting more on more of a list type thing and looking at maybe the services or who else is getting or who's getting the offers from other programs that are comparable to Michigan, rather than and that starts at the top with Jim Harbaugh. So I think that they have a couple positions where they're lacking at. They're lacking at cornerback. They're lacking on the defensive line. The offensive line really looks like to be, the strongest position group going forward. They just don't have, maybe the athletes on the outside, despite Josh Gaddis, Michigan's offensive coordinator, coming in and trying to get the quick, speedy guys that you're seeing at Ohio State and places like that. But if you don't get the elite of that, is that good enough to stay at the level you were at? So, looking back at it, the Josh Gaddis hire a couple of years ago, switching Michigan from more of a West Coast, pro style offense to a spread, looks to be a little bit of maybe a panic after losing to Ohio State a few times and trying to think that you have to become something that, you really have never been. If you're Jim Harbaugh, he's never operated like that. There's so many factors that go into it. They had a really highly ranked recruiting class in 2017, and I think about half the guys or more have since either gone to the NFL or transferred out, and that would be your senior class. So it's a young team. You've seen the transfers. You've seen some recruiting misses where they don't quite have the guys at certain positions. And it's kind of all come to a head here this year. You had a couple key opt-outs. You had 4 really key injuries that I think would have helped you. Your 2 starting offensive tackles have been out the majority of the season, and your 2 defensive ends that were kind of the stalwarts of that defense. You combine that with the fact that Don Brown's defense, if you don't have the superior athletes, doesn't seem to work at this point in college football with the way things have gone. You can't just man up and blitz everybody if you're not getting to the quarterback and you don't have the corners to cover. It's just basically, the facts of life. So I think I mentioned a few of the reasons why. There's no excuse for it. Really any of it, I guess, other than the injuries and things like that. But at this point, they should have, the guys behind some of the guys that have gotten hurt to get it done. So it kind of all was a perfect storm this year. And you're seeing kind of the same thing at some other programs, including Penn State. It's kind of interesting, even in the Big Ten, there's 10 teams that only have 2 wins right now. So it's like, is anybody good outside of, Indiana, Northwestern, and Ohio State, and a couple other teams? So it's just a weird year. But at Michigan, it's no mulligan or anything like that. It's not good enough.
I'm going to edit right here because I should have asked this question before.
Okay.
So Clayton, based on, let me turn that over. Yeah, okay. So Clayton, based on the information you just gave us and other sources, I think it sounds like it's about a 70, at least maybe an 80, 90% certainty that Jim Harbaugh is going to be back in 2021. We'll take the other side and say they can't work things out. There's a reason why it hasn't been announced for these number of days. They just can't come together and reach an agreement. He moves on. There are other coaching candidates, of course, out there. They got to fill the vacancy. We hear certain names on social media, but what are the real possibilities here?
Yeah, the first thing I'll start with kind of the Jim Harbaugh thing too, where I think this could play out, and I guess the scenario where he wouldn't return as Michigan's head coach. So Jim Harbaugh is a guy who, when he was in San Francisco, and it was basically clear that he wasn't going to return as their coach, he wouldn't really communicate with any other team or Michigan until the end of the season. That was kind of his line. Now, there were people kind of, close to Jim that were talking to Michigan and the Michigan athletic director, Jim Hackett, at the time, until, just before their final game. It was like, okay, let's do this. And it was basically wrapped up the Saturday night before their final game. So Jim Harbaugh is a guy that could take this thing until after the season. And if he truly is like, hey, I'm not talking about this until we're done, I'm focused on the team. He's always kind of been minded like that. And also here's, so then that would mean he comes back. Basically, it's like, all right, yeah, now I'm ready to discuss it. I'm ready to sign your deal. But if he's willing to do it right now and he sees possibly the lower base salary, it says, you don't believe in me, I'll take my chance in the NFL, where I think he would get a job and has proven to do well there, then I think he would go. So the percentage-wise, I agree with you. It's about 70% he would return. But let's say he doesn't, like your original question stated. The names out there are Matt Campbell. There's a lot of people that you look around Michigan Twitter, they have their profile pictures set as Matt Campbell from Iowa State, who's done a solid job there. And then Luke Fickell, a guy who's an Ohio State guy, the head coach at Cincinnati, who's done a really, really good job in that conference and what he's been able to build there. Coincidentally enough, he's the one Ohio State coach in the last 15 years when he was the interim there back in 2011 to lose to Michigan. So, you'd that would be especially the thing that Ohio State fans would be selling, as soon as you hire him. But I think Matt Campbell would be the guy, and I think he would be interested in Michigan, interested in, a program, but you don't really know until, and even if there is some interest right now that he may be, showing behind the scenes, which I have no, evidence of, but it's certainly a possibility. You don't know until he signs on the dotted line either. So I think it's a risk to go and do another coaching search, which Michigan has seen 2 out of the last 3 really not play out the way they would have hoped it did. And even this one, with Jim Harbaugh, you certainly had higher hopes than what they've done in 6 years.
Clayton Safey, the Wolverine mag on Rivals. Please join him, the rest of the staff there at Rivals covering Michigan athletics. Clayton, we appreciate you stopping by. The insights phenomenal, and we'll see how this one plays out.
Can I plug something real quick, Mark? So if anyone wants to get the latest on what's going to happen with Jim Harbaugh and things like that, and what's going on, basically, we've had just about daily updates over at thewolverine.com with Chris Ballas, who I mentioned earlier, who's been all over the story. He's our senior editor. And you can use the promo code BLUE60 to get 2 months of that premium content for free. So even if you just want to get a little peek at what's going on and what we're hearing behind the scenes, they can take advantage of that. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on.